He has also interned at Ford Master Motors and multiple other startups. With first hand experience on the admission process of top US universities, Ashish is joining us to give his take on how to make your profile stand out and receive your dream master's or PhD admit. Ashish, over to you.
Thank you, Gunanika, for those kind words. So, as she had mentioned, I'll be taking you through my experience of applying to US universities in major and this getting a dream admit in the college of itself. So, I have a small deck which I prepared to present. So, just let me share my screen. Yeah, is it visible?
Yes, yes, it's visible.
That's great. So, I'll be walking through my experience of handling your MS and PhD admission process. So I have basically got into a PhD program. So I'll be focusing a little more on the research-oriented aspects and research-oriented program admission, which will be very helpful for your application process. So just a reminder which I just wanted to share before I started my session. My admission process in particular, the 2021 fall admission season was a very anonymous one because of the COVID-19 pandemic that we were applying in the midst of. So that actually had changed the application process quite a bit. Some of the test scores that we were mandated were not mandated at the time. We had many universities which were receiving very less funding, and many universities which were not providing graduate admissions since they had 2020 uh, candidates who were taking admission a year late. So this is something which we had to deal with as a group applying for 2021. I hope this, the COVID-19 pandemic situation hasn't resolved yet, of course, but I'm thinking it should be better for the next batch going forward, fall 2022. And I hope you all have the very best in your application process as well. So moving on, so let me just get into my agenda slide here. So this will be my presentation agenda for today. I'll be talking about the three qualifications, as in the basic marks or tests that you will need to excel in before starting your application process. These are your prerequisites, followed by program selection. So as in choosing which program and which college is right for your interest and which would be great for you to do your master's or PhD. The application package that contains all the items that you will need to submit as a part of your application to any university. Scholarships and financial aid. This is something many students have to consider while applying for a master's or PhD because that's a very integral part of the application process. And finally, the actual process as well, the timelines, when you need to start your preparation, when you need to give your exams, when you need to submit your application, all of that. So I'll try to make it an inclusive presentation as much as possible. So let me just start my presentation. Yeah. So pre-qualifications. So there are mainly four pre-qualifications that you will need to have ready by the time you start your application process. These are your CGPA, your GRE score, your total scores, and your transcript. None of these actually make or break your admission process, but they would be very critical in passing those initial filters that graduate schools have, as in the mark-based filters for application. There, you can have, as long as you have these marks above a certain threshold, you'd be good to go, and all you need to focus on is your application package, as in your statement of purpose, your personal statement, your essays, all of that. So after my research on talking to my peers and my seniors, I have come to the conclusion that these are the minimum scores that you will need to have for not being a red flag in any of their filtration processes. So CGPA. So I think you would know by now that CGPA of 8 and above is generally it's a thumb rule for all. It's generally a good enough CGPA for you to get into any tough program as well. That usually translates to about 3.5 out of the 4 GPA scale that they have in US universities. So that is like their minimum benchmark as well. So have a higher CGPA, you do have a better chance. But lower than this, they might take it as a red flag in their application process. So keep that in mind. GRE score. So we actually had some of our universities waive our GRE scores this year, but I'm not sure the trend would continue in the subsequent admission process as well. So GRE scores, you will have to write three sections mainly: your verbal section, quantitative section, and also writing section as well. So the verbal section and quantitative sections are the more important parts of the GRE exam, where I have mentioned that the minimum scores to be 155 for the verbal section and 165 for the quantitative section. These scores are, if you add it up, you will get a total of 320. And if I am, and based on these scores, even the most toughest programs have a requirement of only up to 325. All universities accept students who have a scores of around 320 and above. So this would be a good benchmark for you to set as your GRE score and work ahead based on this. If you consider my case, I prepared for my GRE without any coaching. It was just a self preparation, and I took a month to prepare for it during my semester college. I think preparing for GRE, many people consider coaching institutes to be the gold standard. So people generally start enrolling very early to institutes, start going for classes. I do not, it's everyone's own preference, but I do not feel that that was a very big necessity. If you can do as much as tests as possible before your exam, try to catalog your verbal knowledge, try to make like Magui's flashcards and stuff like that. You should be able to excel very well in your GRE, and you shouldn't have any problems getting above 320. 325 would be the ideal score. Anything above that would be a plus. And your verbal section as well, it's graded out of 6. Try to make sure you have anything above 3.5 or 4. You will be set in your GRE for your admission. Coming to TOEFL. So TOEFL is actually a comparatively easier test than GRE. You should have, it's just an English requirement based test. The total score that you need to score in your TOEFL across 4 sections are 100 plus. So anything above 100 is what universities generally accept. And one critical point is that your speaking section scores must be about 25 for 30. This is because most of the assistantships for graduate students, if it's a teaching-based assistantship, they require you to have a score of about 25 for getting an assistantship as their basic requirement. So make sure you are able to excel in at least your speaking section alone. That would help you get your scholarships and assistantships very easily. And finally, your transcripts. So just try to apply and get them as soon as your 6 semesters is over. That will save you a lot of headaches when it goes towards like the deadlines of your application. So I'll move on to my next slide. Coming to program selection, these are the key points which I feel I use for selecting my programs and finalizing which ones to apply for and which ones I shouldn't. So usually there are a lot of universities that are there in the US, and people generally get confused by the amount of choices they are provided. They're unable to shortlist what universities that they would feel that it would be a great fit for them. So these are like the 7 points which I would keep as the basic ranking criteria that you should use to evaluate whether to apply to a university or not. So the first, number of programs to apply for. This is actually a critical section. So you can actually apply to how many programs you want, but every application costs a significant amount of money. So it costs anywhere between $100 to $200 for putting a single application to a single program in a college. So that is something you need to keep in mind. So what I did was I applied for around 10 universities. I split my universities into 3 categories. 4 universities were my dream universities to apply for. 4 were good universities which I felt would be a great fit for me. And my last 2 were safe universities which I know I could bank on in terms of the application process, the difficulty in getting in based on acceptance rate, all of that. So I think this is actually a metric that many of my peers followed in my admission season. So everyone applied roughly around 5 to 10 universities in their application season. This is something which I feel would help you also if you can keep in mind and apply around that number. It would help you a lot. So any you can apply to any number as I told earlier. Just keep in mind that you are able to like track each application and do justice to every one of them. Moving on. So college and program rankings. This is a very easy one actually. So to know how well a program is ranked or not among the other programs present in basically US universities, USnews.com provides a very comprehensive ranking methodology. So it would be able to give you a comprehensive account of where a university's program stands As in, if you're looking for the rankings of MSCS programs, you can just look up MSCS rankings on US News, and you can identify which should be the top universities and which should be the mid ones and the lower ones. It's a very easy way to like get a quick opinion on what universities are ranked higher than others. And then this is something which is very specific for research. So most of the MS programs also involve a bit of research as well. They have research components, except the non-thesis programs. And PhD programs are, of course, based on research rankings. So CS rankings is actually a very good site for computer science and allied areas research. So what the site does is it gives you a comprehensive account of where each program, each college's professors stand in terms of publication history and in terms of the types of conferences that they publish to and the number of citations or the number of popularity that each publication has in the academic area. So CS rankings is a very great place for you to start with if you are looking at universities which have a great research background and you would like to learn more about the professors who are there and learn more about their programs as well. So location preference. This is something which is highly personal as well. Location preference is something you need to look at while applying to US universities or any universities in general, because that would help you familiarize yourself with the location. As if you have relatives there, you have like friends or family there, it would be very easy for you to get settled in a given place. That is actually a thing to consider, which would help you in the long run. It would make your travel or your shifting to US easier. Location preference is again a highly like personal point. If you have someone in US and you have a great university which is in that state or near the city, please do consider applying to that city. It would help you a lot in the future. And finally, the key point: cost of living and tuition. So cost of living is actually something that people generally don't take into account while putting their applications. There are certain cities in US which are generally highly priced compared to the ones which are more of college towns where the pricing or the cost of living is lower. So if you're going for a master's program, this is something you need to take into consideration as you will be funding your whole education journey. Some cities, like if I take Los Angeles or New York, for example, have a very high standard of living, and the cost of living will usually shoot above maximum threshold in terms of other universities. So please do consider the cost of living in particular for MS programs. When it comes to PhD programs, you have a benefit of PhD programs being fully funded, as in you do not need to pay any tuition, and you are also guaranteed to receive an assistantship for the 4 or 5 years that you are doing your PhD. Since PhD programs, since it's a long-term doctoral program, they do provide these benefits. And if you are interested in research, I highly request you to look at PhD programs as well. They do accept applications directly from the bachelor level. You do not have a master's degree as a minimum requirement. PhD programs do provide these benefits as long as you are into research and you feel that you are inclined to pursue in a PhD. Finally, course specialization. So, in terms of masters, there are few courses that are very if you're like if you are interested in an area of research or if you're interested in an area of work, let's say human computer interaction. Human computer interaction, there are specific courses that take masters in human computer interaction across the major universities at US. They come into a different application pool compared to the general masters of computer science or the masters, the regular electrical masters or your ECE masters, and they would provide you a highly specialized curriculum for your specific area of interest. This is something you can consider to and apply for if you feel that the program which you are applying for has a good standing in the industry and people value the program's curriculum as industry standard. So please look into your programs carefully and do not apply to specializations just because they are in hot topics or they use trending words. To look into the history of a college's program, look into how long a program is being offered, and check if the industry if they have people who have hired in the industry, and talk to people who have taken that program previously. It will help give you a great perspective on whether you can value that program as an industry standard or not. This is specific for masters, and PhD you do not need to focus on course specialization aspects. It's more towards your research specialization that would be the more important part. And finally, the SSN Alumni Network. This is a very important resource that I urge all of you to look into. all of our seniors or students of SSM have taken admissions into various universities across the world, and they have a wide network of people across US also. Talk like you can look at the previous admissions history, as in you can talk to your teachers to know which universities students generally apply to from SSM. There are a few universities which people from SSM generally get admitted. These universities are the ones which the universities are very familiar with students from SSM. That's a huge plus, since it would not be a unknown university that they would consider you to be from. They have a standard to benchmark you against, and they would give you they give your application a fair look, and it would be it is too beneficial as well. So generally, if there's a history of people going to a given college, you do have a higher chance of getting an admit in that college as well. So SSN's alumni network is a resource you should tap into. Talk to seniors who are doing their graduate education right now, and people who have passed out as well. That would give you a great perspective as to which universities would be very beneficial for you. So let me move on. This is something like program selection in terms of masters is more towards the actual college and the program offering. But for PhD, you will need to take a deep look at the research group or the faculty that you are applying to. So that is a very great consideration that you will need to make in a PhD program. You will need to research on which research group or which faculty you are applying to. So for the first step, of course, you have to clearly define your research interest. So PhD programs are very specific in terms of the research area that you will need to work in. So I would urge you to first clarify which research areas are your key interests and categorize them as your area of interest, and be sure to stick to this across all of your application materials. I think your statement of purpose, personal statement. Make sure you are very clear in what you will be working on in your PhD, at least the area. You needn't specify a problem, just the area alone, and then move forward with your application process. Next step is identifying the professors that you'll be interested in working with. This is something you'll need to do a lot of work on. Pre-preparation is more towards identification of professors in this area for PhD. So you need to go through the faculty list of all these universities who are working in your area, look at their research groups, read through their publications, try to understand what the research group is working on, the projects that they're doing. It'll give you a good idea on what types of problems that you will also be working on once you go there. It'll give you a good perspective of what type of program that you will be joining. And one more thing is you can look at the recent funding a professor has received also. So basically, if a professor has enough funding for a given academic year to take a student, that's when he will decide to admit a given student in an academic year. So that is something that you will not be able to judge before your application, but you can make calculated decision to apply to a program or not based on their previous admit history and the number of people in the research group, all of that. So identifying the professors is something very important. Try to go in detail to a professor's history and try to understand what work he's doing currently to help aid your application. And learn about college funding, college research groups and funding. This, as I mentioned, your research group which you'll be joining will be very critical to your PhD journey, as you will need to work along with your group and your advisors towards like across your 4 years or 5 years of your PhD study. This is something that you will need to work on much more than maybe a master's student, since their requirements will not be that specific towards research. You can look into this as a specific thing and try making your applications more refined. And finally, talk to current graduate students and professors. Talking to them will give you the best perspective, of course. So if you are able to get in touch with a graduate student in who's working under advisor that you would like to apply to, or if you are in contact with any professors through family or friends who are in the US or any other universities that you would like to apply to, take the chance, reach out. If your family members, for example, your parents have any relatives or friends who are professors there, by reaching out to them, they'd be able to guide you very specifically for any college, and they'll be able to give you the inside story of how they give funding and how they apply and the application process in general. So that will help you a lot. Try to reach out and talk to as much people as you can. It will help you a lot. Trust me. Yeah. So coming to the application package. So this is just a list of stuff that you will need to submit as a part of your application to any college, apart from filling the application itself. So there are four major things that you will need to prepare: your personal statement, your resume or CV, your statement of purpose, and your letters of recommendation. The personal statement is something people usually overlook. I myself overlooked it while I was while I was applying to university, as it's not mandated across every university, but it's something that most majority of programs ask for. This is not more towards your research or academic side per se. This is more about understanding what kind of person you are, what's your ethical or what's your ethnic or racial background, which country do you come from, what is your what are your hobbies, what are your interests, what type of personality are you. US universities generally give preference to hiring, taking candidates who have a holistic view of stuff. So I think they are not just focused on academics, they also have extracurricular and co-curricular background as well. So it's just a single page document that you'll need to submit, maybe 500, 600 words. So it shouldn't be a very long article. That's something I think you should look into beforehand and try to prepare it in advance. Uh, Moving on, we can talk about the resume or your CV. This is just a box standard resume template, a 2 pages long resume with highlighting all of your key achievements, your projects, your certifications, and your internships. Make sure you keep it brief to the point and try to include all of the key areas of research rather than just the technical aspects of it. If you have any project, for example, try to include what would be your critical contribution to it and what would be the novel aspects of it rather than just the implementation details and how and where you implemented it. That would help you a lot. This is what software generally look for. And finally, the statement of purpose. So this is, I would say, the most critical aspect to your application process because all your pre-qualification steps, all of it just leads up to the statement of purpose. And this is where you will need to narrate a compelling story for getting your admission into any university as required. So I have just tried to break down the writing of a statement of purpose into 5 chunks. So this is basically the paragraph structure that would be an easy way to write any statement of purpose. There's just a basic formatting for this. You will need the statement of purpose mustn't exceed 2 pages in length. It should be around 1300 words. This is average limit. Many colleges specify or don't specify limit. It's usually just 2 pages, or they might say a specific number of words, and it's averagely around 1300. And Times New Roman is usually a standard font size. So font size, it would be it's generally accepted font size for different colleges, and that should be it in your formatting size. Nothing special. Now moving on to the statement of purpose. So the thing that you need to keep in mind in your statement of purpose is you will need to narrate your application, the reason for applying to a university in a coordinated fashion across the whole statement of purpose. It should be in a chronological order where the reader can understand each and every segment of it. He can understand where you're coming from, where you're applying, why you're applying to a given program, what is your background in this given area, and why should they take you as a student in their program. So we can start with the first section of the statement of purpose, if I would like to say, the introduction section. So this is where you need to clearly define who you are, why you are applying, which program you are applying to, and to which area in a given, if it's a specialization or if it's a given specific course, which course you are applying to, and an introduction about why you would like to apply to this program. A very brief introduction. It should be about 1 or 2 paragraphs where you mention who you are, where you are applying to. They should be very clear. Like reading the first 2 paragraphs, they should get an account as to who to forward this application to in case you are selected for the next level of verification. So universities generally have different levels of verification. So the first level would be the mark based filtering. The second level would be the statement of purpose based filtering. And then finally, if it's a PhD program, you will need to do interviews also. So introduction should be very specific. They should know which program you're applying to and who you are. Secondly, you will come to your research and study history. Usually, people try to narrate this in the form of a cohesive story. As in, you will need to say where you started your education, as in how you started your college education. Some people generally start even earlier, like from school or even before that. So that is something which universities generally don't look at much. They look at mostly your college education and what you've gained from that, since that's the most recent education history of yours. Start from your college, like your first year of college or second year of college, when you started working on your, let's say you started working on your profile, you started working on a few projects from the first year. Get narrate on why you chose to do a certain project, what piqued your interest, what all technologies did you work on it, and what was the novel idea. If you have done something specific or you've not done something which is unique in terms of project ideas or project implementation, mention the unique points of it. So professors or college graduate universities generally have a good idea of what implementation is and how to implement stuff. It's a very box standard process. So they would like to look more into the novelty or your critical thinking aspect or problem solving aspect. The way you choose to solve a particular problem is of much more importance than how you solved it. So please delve into your background as in why you chose a particular problem and what was your novel contribution in solving a given problem. Let it be a project, an internship, any given point. As long as you're able to justify why you chose it and how you solved it, you should be good to go. If you can take 2 or 3 paragraphs to do your research in study history, just make sure you have a cohesive order in which events go instead of just tossing in events there. Try to make it as easy to understand and cohesive as possible. And then coming to your current research internship role. So that's just after you're giving your education or research history, mention what is your current role. If you're in an internship, what you're currently working on, or if you're working on, generally you would be starting your final year project by the time you submit your application. Try to give a detailed account as to what you're trying to work on in your final year project, what you're trying to accomplish. That will give them a perspective of what you're currently interested in, what you're currently working on, and what kind of interest you are currently having. Finally, the justification for the program and course selection. So the last few paragraphs should detail with specifically as why you chose the given program. So the introduction, you would have given a brief account of what program you've chosen and maybe 1 or 2 sentences of why you have chosen the program, why you have chosen this kind of study, graduate study. This place you should be very clear on how to elaborate on why you've chosen a program. As in, if it's a master's program, you would be aware of the people who have applied to it, the universities, the people that recruit from a university, the professors who are there in the university who are working on given topics of your interest, the research groups that you would like to join, the mainly the you should be able to justify on why you chose a given university, why you chose a given professor, and why they should also hire you, what are your area of interest, and how you would benefit from it, and how the university would benefit as well. So if you are choosing to work under, if you are applying for a PhD or a master's program with a research-oriented role, you generally need to mention which professors that you would like to work under or which professors work you would like to work with in this area. So you would like to you mention their names and justify why you would like to work with each of them in this section of your statement of purpose. That would give them a clear idea of where to forward your application to. So in case of a PhD program, your final review will be done by the advisors that you list. This is where your mentioning of the advisor names, they would forward your applications to these people first, and they would be the people who would finally decide on whether to hire you or not. So that is very critical. So make sure you mention the professor name and try to be as brief as possible on why you would like to join the university and why you would like to join the research group as well. And finally, your conclusion. That is just the summation of what we have written, and end it off in a nice note. Make sure your language is crisp. You needn't have any you needn't have much of fancy words or any complicated diction in your statement of purpose. It just needs to be a simple phrase and meaningful way of writing your achievements and academic record. So one more thing, in case in your pre-qualifications your CGPA is a bit lower than the average, or you have a lower GRE score, and maybe that is attributed to a reason as the CGPA which is lowered is because of a course which is not in your area of interest, as in if it's an elective course which is in, let's say, hospital management or something. It's not a part of your core courses in computer science. You can mention that as well in your statement of purpose, and they will be able to take that as a reasoning for considering your if something in your pre-qualifications is lacking. You can give a proper justification in this section. That would help them to evaluate your application better. And here, so this is just some tips I would like to give specifically for PhD applications. So mentioning all the professors that you would like to work with, that is something you need to do in your why justification for choosing a college section. You need to mention the research groups and the professors that you would like to work under, and the research problems that you are interested in solving. So try to give a good account of why you're choosing a professor and why you're choosing a certain problem. And this is an important thing that many people were confused with. I was even confused with this while I was applying. Research experience is not equal to publication. So people are generally discouraged from applying for maybe PhD programs and MSc programs also to an extent because they do not have a publication history or they haven't published papers. Well, for that fact, I haven't published a single paper till now. But what I have is a research experience where I have worked on research projects. I have presented my projects in different conferences, project presentation conferences, poster presentation conferences. I have participated in hackathons. All of these are places where you can demonstrate your interest in a given research area. And the problems that you worked on here would be if it's related to your area of research in a PhD, it would be very beneficial to include them and highlight them. Only place where publications are of a very important, they're considered to be very important, is when your publication is in an international level conference. That is what US universities mandate as publications. So you have a publication in an international level conference, that is amazing. You would have a very great chance of getting a master's or a PhD admission. But unless you get into an international level publication, it does not matter much. As long as you have a good research history, you have a good background in whatever area that you're applying to, you would be considered as a potential applicant regardless of publications or not. So please do not get discouraged if you do not have publications yet. Try to work on important research topics, research areas. Try to demonstrate or showcase your work in different areas like competitions, hackathons, whatever it may be. Try to get your work out. Publications is not the only route to it, but make sure that you have a good research background in any area that you're applying. Research interest compatibility. So the area that you're applying to in PhD would generally be a wide area of research. So let's say computer vision. Computer vision consists of many problems such as, let's say, autonomous driving, 3D computer vision, object understanding, scene understanding. Try to keep your area of research as a specific area, but not a specific problem. So people working on a specific problem are very limited across different universities in the US. So make sure that you're able to keep a specific research area as your area of interest, but not a specific problem, as it significantly narrows your chances. And at times, professors may not have the specific problem that you're working on as a vacancy to hire you. So keep that in mind while applying to different universities. And here, novel ideas and learning focus over technical aspects. So as I mentioned, even in your PhD interviews, you would be asked to elaborate on like the novel idea that is behind your research project. What difficulties did you face? How did you solve it? Your problem solving skills essentially, and your background knowledge in a given subject. So it's never about the implementation details or how you try to implement it, although that's an additional bonus. The main focus will be on the idea or the problem solving capability of you as a person that they value. And finally, PhD interviews are something that is it's a mandatory part of PhD process. So generally, by the time you complete your applications, 1 or 2 months after that, I think in February, if professors are interested in hiring you as a potential PhD candidate, they'll be reaching out to you. So they'll be setting up a basic interview on Zoom or Meet. You'll be able to talk with them. They would have an agenda, and they would try to question you on all the points that you mentioned in your statement of purpose and your resume. So be very clear in your statement of purpose. Don't mention anything that isn't true or isn't factually correct. Try to be thorough with all of your research projects or research areas that you mention in your statement of purpose, as that will come in handy while you give your interviews for PhD. And finally, keep a cool head, keep calm, and be confident in what you present there. That should be, it's more of an informal setting interview, as in you have just you and the professor interacting there. You should be fine as long as you're clear in where you've applied for, why you've applied for a certain professor, and if you're ready to elaborate on your project. So yeah, letters of recommendation. This is again another important part in your application process. Everything that you mentioned in your statement of purpose, most of it can be backed and can be validated by your letters of recommendation. As in most of your projects that you worked on would generally involve a mentor or a professor or a college, like let's say an internship guide who had worked with you, who had managed you in working in a given area or given problem or given project. So make sure you get your recommendations from recommenders you have collaborated with. Usually, you are required to give three recommendation writers, as in three recommenders for any given program. And out of that, two have to be from the college that you apply from, as in the college you're studying in, and one can be an industry recommender or an external college recommender as well. So make sure you choose recommenders who have worked closely with you, who know what your areas of interest are, which program you're applying to, and who are ready to understand the effort that you put into their project. You have worked with them well, because a recommendation letter will be a very crucial part of the application process. So make sure you select the right recommender and highlight your profile's key elements. Often a recommender will be biased towards what he or she knows from working with you in that given project setting. But try to give your resume or CV, or try to educate them on all of your areas of interest for all you have worked on, and what are the key things that you would like to highlight in your recommendation letter. And ask them to, you can request your recommenders to nudge certain areas and highlight certain areas over the others, to give you a better perspective and eyes of a reader for a letter recommendation. So that's why I stress on the point, choose recommenders that you collaborated with. Just because, let's say you ask recommendations from the HOD of our college, but you haven't worked on any project or you haven't had her as a teacher of any for any class. That would not be an advisable thing, even though she is the HOD of our college. She would be qualified to give you a recommendation only if you have worked on a project with, let's say, Sita Babu ma'am. You should have worked on a project with ma'am to have the ability to ask for a recommendation, and that would help you a long way in getting your profile recognized. So this is something that you should be very careful on. Do not please make sure you select your recommenders properly. And finally, update your recommenders on your application deadline. So generally, the recommendation writers have a very hectic schedule during the application season. They'll be writing recommendations for multiple candidates, and you'll need to constantly remind them that your application is pending on a given deadline. As that is your responsibility to make sure they're informed of application deadline. So please keep communicating with them, keep them informed, and try to give your application, submit them in advance so that they will not face any difficulty while submitting their recommendation. So recommendation letters are a very important tool. Use them correctly; they'll help further your application in the application process. And finally, scholarships and financial aid. So this is something which I found I had a really hard time collating information about, since this is a very non-standard part. Every college has its own way of giving its financial aid. So specifically for master's programs, the financial aid that is provided varies widely from different programs. So there isn't a standard that you can fall back on. But there are three types of major financial aids that usually universities provide. So the research assistantship, the teaching assistantships, and graduate assistantships they comprise of the majority forms of financial aid that a master's student or even PhD students will take up. So research assistantship is when you work with a given professor on their research group or their research project, and you will be a part of the research group for a particular semester or a year. So there you will be working with a professor on a given research project, and you will be paid for your research work as part of the group. Sometimes you will also be, this is basically all these assistantships are guaranteed to give you, to cover your cost of living. Some of these assistantships for master's students in specific may also give you a tuition waiver. So getting a tuition waiver is, tuition is a very important part to consider in any application. So getting a tuition waiver would be a great thing if you're a master's student. Try to look at these assistantships beforehand by talking to seniors in a given college and understanding what they have in forms of assistantship. It's basically dependent on the funding that the college receives. So if a college receives a lot of funding for a given year, they will be able to provide more number of assistantships. So colleges which have a higher research output generally get more funding. It goes like that. So make sure you have a good background on what types of assistantships college offers, and make sure you grab those opportunities once you go in person on campus there. So all these assistantships are usually not given from the moment you start your master's program, but they are usually got after you spend a semester or a year there, getting to know the professors there, getting to know the research labs there, getting to know the university teaching assistantship opportunities there. then you can work on getting these substances. So unless and like very specific applications or very few like highly qualified candidates may get substances while they get their admit distance itself. Although it's a very rare thing for masters students to get on by the time of their admit distance. But many students do receive their assistantship as soon as they go to campus or after the semester. So research assistantships are basically to research projects. Teaching assistantships, you will have to assist the teacher while for handling a given course. So you will have to be you'll have to evaluate papers. Maybe you will have to help in course scheduling. You will have to correct assignments from students. It's just more of administrative work on behalf of the teachers for a given course. Finally, graduate assistantship. So this is not related to academics in general, more of like it's more of an administrative assistantship where you will be working maybe as a part of the university library or the university's admissions office. You will be handling paperwork. You'll be detailing with you'll be handling queries, or it's a more of an administrative process where you'll be working on all of these. So that's a different type of assistantship altogether. So graduate assistantships are also available for master's students. And finally, scholarships. So scholarships, there are two types of scholarships. So external scholarships and universities graduate scholarships. External scholarships, although hard, some people do get them. It's usually available to a variety of organizations for specific purposes. So there are some common resources that are used for getting external scholarships, like finaid.org and fundingstudy.org. So fundingustudy.org, they give you a good idea of what are the available scholarships. It's usually advisable to look at scholarships early on in the admission process. As in, if you are applying for fall of 2022, I would advise you to start looking for scholarships right now, because usually the scholarships get like the initial application process for scholarships get completed very early on. So start looking as soon as possible if you're looking for external scholarships. And university graduate scholarships are usually applied, like you are taken into consideration for every one of the universities for graduate scholarships the moment you apply. So as you give your applications, many universities automatically consider you for all the scholarships that they offer for a graduate program. They would then give their decisions whether you got it or not after maybe during your admit, like after you receive your admit or as you reach campus there. So it's a different process for each university. Usually they do not have a separate application process as such for scholarships. It's generally included in the application. So that covers scholarships in much detail. So as I mentioned, PhD programs are a fully funded program. So you get your tuition fee waivers and your assistantship for 4 to 5 years of your PhD study. So that is something you can look into if you are not if you are not comfortable with the cost of living and tuition in a given area, or you're interested in research and you're inclined to go in a research area, like if you're going to a research oriented like career path, that would be a very preferred option instead of doing a master's first and then thinking for a PhD if you feel qualified. So I'd just like to give you presently all the options in advance, and it will help you make a more informed decision. And finally, this is, I think, a comprehensive application timeline, which I had framed with respect to even my own application system. So this is a timeline which I would advocate you to follow as well, if you can, as it would give you enough time for completing each step in the process. So completing your GRE. So I completed my GRE in my 5th semester holidays. I had enough free time to prepare them. That was a good time for me to spend wholeheartedly on GRE. I was done by January. Completing my TOEFL. So April was the time the COVID pandemic was a bit peak for me. So I had it much later. But by the time your 6th semester ends, that would be a good time for you to prepare for your TOEFL and give your test for TOEFL. And these tests, and GRE in particular, some people feel the requirement to write a re-exam or something. The earlier you complete your first attempt of your GRE, earlier you prepare for it, the more time you have in the future for adjusting in terms of mistakes or re-attempts, etc. And by August, as soon as you get your 6th semester results, collect your transcript. So we actually had our 6th semester exams cancelled. We had problems in printing our mark sheet, so it was delayed all the way till November for us to get a transcript. I don't think you will be facing the same issues this year. So try to get your transcript processes done as soon as possible by the end of your 6th semester results declaration. By September, this is an important thing to note. Start drafting your SOP and your personal statements. So program selection starts being made. So start thinking about the programs that you would like to apply to. start thinking about the colleges that you're interested in applying to, the areas of research that you're interested in. Start your research by May. It will you will have a like you would think that selecting colleges might be an easy part of your application process, but no, that would be the most confusing part. I experienced the same thing myself. So give enough time for you to revise and re-revise and finalize on the colleges that will be applying to. Give enough time for that and start your SOP drafting and personal statement process by September. So you'll be able to give one, two, three, four. It takes a lot of revisions to get your SOP right. Try to make sure you get a lot of perspective on this. Like ask your seniors or your parents or anyone who can evaluate your SOP to read them, reread them, give your advice. As you would not like you generally need to revise it a lot of times to get it to a level where you're satisfied. It takes time and maybe 1 or 2 months of constantly. I mean, you will not need to be in a hurry at the end to complete your SOP. Then it'll give you enough time to relax and do your writing and completing all of your like personal statements and lessons in advance. By October, reach out to all of your recommenders. Try to contact your recommenders. Ask them if they will be open to giving you a recommendation for your university and finalize them. So it's important to know your recommenders in advance because like college professors will be very busy. They'll be receiving a lot of requests from lots of students to be recommenders, and that would be something that takes up a lot of their time. So make sure you do get your recommenders finalized by October, November, so that you can start requesting for recommendations once you start applying. And if I'm right, the earliest deadline for program application which I applied to was Ohio State University, which is around November end. So I think November would be a good time for you to finalize your application package, like your SOP, personal statements, your recommenders, and start your application filling after. So the filling of your application will actually take a long time as they do take a lot of information from you. They require you to convert your GPS from a 10 scale to a 4 scale, upload all of those. It's a lot of it's a lot of boring work that you need to do initially. So give enough time for you to do all of it and be sure of all of your information. Don't make mistakes in your application as it'll be tough to correct them later. So try to make sure you get everything right and enough time to check your. So by November, start your application, like start applying to your university so that you're applying just before the deadline, so as not under the deadline date or something. By February, usually you will be reached out to by the professors who you're interested. If you are applying for a PhD position, they'll be setting up your interviews and they'll be asking for, they'll be having they'll be scheduling interview dates and talking to you more on the interview process, what they require, what their lab, what research is based on, all of that. So your interviews happen in February, and by April you would be receiving all of your admits decisions from all universities. April 15th is like their deadline. Yeah, I mean, at least for US universities, April 15th is like their national deadline for like submitting their admits to students. You'd be receiving all of your admits by April. So there might be some admits that come late, but mostly by April, majority of your colleges would have given you this. So by April, I ideally hope all of you will be receiving all of your dream admits. And by August, as I had mentioned, you would be traveling to your college. I'm actually traveling by next week. So I wish all of you the best. And I would like to see all of you at different universities across the world and pursuing your dreams as well. So that's it for me. Thank you. So we can move on to questions as well. Any questions that are there, I'd be happy to answer to the best of my ability. Yeah, so on this Slido link, I'll be looking at your query. So yeah, please feel free to drop in your questions in this link at Slido. So it will help me like look at your questions and I'll try my best to answer all of them in the given time frame that we have.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah,
Yeah, so how do we determine which professor is best for the course that you want to do, and what he is specialized in, or what he or she is you know,
yeah,
looking for taking people in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So selecting your professors, it's like you need to get started at first by looking through your like if you're applying to a specific department, look through a faculty page. Generally, each professor has their own website detailing their research interests, the work that they've done currently and in the past, their recent publications, the conferences that they published to, and their sometimes professors do also post that they're looking for students for a given academic year. I think we are looking for PhD students for fall 2021 or fall 2022. So their website usually gives you a good idea. Their research lab website or their personal website would give you a good idea of whether they're looking for students and whether they have publications or they're working on area which is familiar to you and you're interested to apply as well. So websites like CS Rankings also give you like a collated source of all of professors working on a given area. It will give you a publication history of all of these professors in a given area. You can make use of these resources and the faculty webpage for selecting your professors. And reaching out to them is something which I am skeptical about. So before you start your application, after you give your application, generally professors don't respond that much to emails or stuff. So try to get your information. Like if you're able to contact a professor through a common family or a friend, if you have a relative who knows a professor, please do so. It's like professors generally very responsive to people they know. They'll be ready to entertain questions and all of that. So try to talk to as much as people as you can in the university that you're applying to, and try to, if you are able to talk to the professor that you are interested in applying to, well and good. He'll be able to give exactly what his requirements are to be taking a given student. But yeah, that's not usually what happens. The faculty webpage is the best way for you to do. And talking to people at the university who are in the same program or allied programs will give you a good perspective. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let me look at the Slido questions over here. So yeah, someone has asked here what are the ways to make a profile unique and stand out from others. So there isn't one specific way to make a profile unique or make it stand out. It's all about highlighting what you have done in a positive light and making sure you put forward the best version of your work or your project. So that will help distinguish yourself from other candidates. You're able to clearly identify what your area of interest, what you've worked on, why you have worked on each of these topics, and if you have done a research project or any complicated project of that kind, if it's a team project, what are your contributions to it? If you're able to detail all of these, the professors are generally very receptive to answering. I mean, they're very receptive to taking people who have a clear idea of what they've done and then what they're looking for. So if you are confused and all over the place, they will not be very likely to select. That's what I would say, that making a profile stand out should be, it's a very personal process. So try to like first thing is develop your profile, try to do certification, participate in some try publication. All of that's fine. But highlighting it in your SOP or your resume is where it matters. So that's what they'll be looking at. And then yeah. Okay. There's a question here. Could you please speak about the transcripts that you stated? So transcripts are something that it's a collation of your marks for every subject that you're taking from first to sixth semester. You need to submit that as a proof that you've studied in a given university to the university that you're applying to. So you will have to request if you're like, I do not know if it's the same in the autonomous institute as well. For us, we have to request it to an university. You have to apply to an university for getting a transcript. They usually had us submit like the printed copies of a mark sheet, and they used to provide it separately. That's usually how it goes. It's a straightforward process. So as long as you have your mark sheet for all 6 semesters, and you write a requisition letter like I will require my mark sheet, they'll be able to provide it to you. So you need to submit that as the proof that you've studied, and that gives you your like your mark for all the subjects that you studied. Okay, so then let me go to the next one. So how many projects or internships are a good number? So actually, as I had said, there are no specific numbers or like specific number of projects or internships that are good. It depends on the work that you do in each internship or project. So let's say you do a single project, but you're able to get an international publication out of it. That is way more valuable than doing multiple projects which are not of that much of it. So it depends on the way that you work, and it depends on the projects that you work on, and make sure that you work on projects that are interested in the areas that you wish to apply to in your university as well. So they would like you to have a cohesive profile. So you apply to a given area, you will say you're interested in it. They would like you to have some projects or internships or anything for that matter to support your claim. That claim will be supported only if you work on these given areas in prior. That would be the best way for you to say if a project or internship. Nothing is technically, there's no definition of good here. It all depends on your profile and how you choose to highlight. Yeah. So the next question, what are the resources or books we could use to prepare for JRE and courses? So what I used was, I actually took a different process to this. So I prepared by myself for about a month. I would say the best way to prepare is to write as much as tests as possible, at least for GRE. So I never found it to be easy to read through course books or read to do untimed exercises for that matter. I found that doing tests in real time, as in timing out your test, doing every section, doing sample tests. I did maybe 10, 20 sample tests. Each of those sample tests taught me a lot more than what I would be able to gain from studying a given book or a course material over a given period of time. So I feel that is something that I had followed differently compared to others instead of going to a class and reading. I would advise you the same. So try to do as much as tests as possible. Sample tests. I think many of the providers like Kaplan, Princeton, all of these providers, they give you sample tests which are of online format. You can try like buying those test materials and attempting as much as tests as possible. And maybe Magu's flashcards were something which I looked into as well. They were very helpful in my verbal reasoning. Try to attend as much as tests as possible and try to use flashcards or all of these for remembering complex words that you may not be familiar with. TOEFL, the important part that you need to focus on is in the speaking section, as I mentioned. Try to start speaking on different topics. So you will generally be advised to speak for 30 seconds or a minute on a given topic. It might be a recantation of a passage that you read or some conversation that they had spoken earlier or a topic of your own interest. So speaking is something that you need to practice and get your level of satisfaction by. So try to practice a lot of prompts. So YouTube would have lots of sample prompts for you to read into for TOEFL. Try to speak on those prompts and listen to their sample examples for getting more of a reference. That would be, I think, that should be enough for TOEFL or GRE. So on an average, how much does it cost to complete your master's program? So yeah, that is a crucial question. I think all of us will need to look into that very crucially. If I am right, it's not a specified number as so it varies between. I think tuition takes about $50,000 at least in the US. My applications were specific to US university, so tuition was somewhere around $50,000, $55,000 at minimum. So most of the universities had this as their base amount. There would be changes based on the location that you apply to. For say a master's in New York would be much costlier than a master's in maybe let's say Kentucky. So the city that you apply to for your master's, the college that you apply to, would be very crucial in determining the cost of your master's program itself. Living costs are something that you need to take into account as well. The costlier, the higher the city grade is, as in if it's a tier one city, you'd be paying a lot for your rent, for your groceries, all of that. Please consider that while making applications. Many students generally look at just the university, but not the location. Location is something that don't make or break your application process, but it's better to get to know what kind of place that you are going to go and live in because it's a 2 year or 4 year commitment that will make. So look at the places that you're applying to university and look at the university costs as well in advance. Usually student loans and personal financing are the way to go for that if it's a master's program. In PhD, it's completely covered by the university. So yeah, so next. So are both projects and internships necessary to have a good profile? Can internships be of any sort related to your domain? So I would say projects and internships are, I mean, it's good to have both. So there is no harm in having both projects and internships. But you should be ready to elaborate on what you have worked on in these areas with very specific amount of accuracy. I would say that working on a few research projects, if you are applying for a research-oriented role, more than internships, work on a few research projects would give you an idea of what research would be like. If you are going to go for a research-oriented role, they would like to see you having research history and working on research relevant problems. Having worked on projects, you would get that exposure to research problems. That is something that would help you in terms of like getting familiar with what types of research you will be doing in your master's or a PhD. It'll give you a more clear idea of what you're applying to, and even for professors or faculty to judge you based on your projects and your areas of interest. So internships can be of any sort related to your domain, as long as, yeah, if you're able to get another internship, it's all the more better. So it doesn't, as long as it's relevant at least to a bit. So if it's a computer science based role, if you're applying for masters in computer science, if you have a software engineering internship or something like that, it should be a very valuable thing for you to have. So there is no harm of course. And here, okay, next, let's move to the next question. Does our area of interest affect our admission process? So our admission process might not vary much. So, but if it's in the process would be the same for all of the different things. So if it's a mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, computer science. But in terms of your research areas, the amount of funding that you have, if you're applying for research oriented program, the types of research that programs do, that will change a lot. So the area of interest may not affect your admission process as long as you're prepared with information related to that. So taking generic information on master's programs or PhD programs in general might not be the best way to go about. If you're looking for a master's in computer science, try to collect more information on your program based on the ones available on the internet and try to make an educated decision. So area of interest does affect as long as it won't affect you as long as you're prepared with what your area of like what your admission process in your area of interest. So it isn't much of it shouldn't be a very crucial thing. Like it won't affect your process as long as you are prepared. And yeah, so how important is extracurricular activity? So if it's necessary to have something good to say about our extracurricular activity. Well, in my opinion, yes. So US universities generally look for a rounded profile. So they do not look for people who are just interested in academics. They would like you to have a personality as a whole. As in you have some extracurriculars, let's be music, sports, dance, anything of that matter. You have a good extracurricular base also, they would be it would be more of a push for them to hire you as an international student rather than people who are just focused on academics, because academics is something you would have many people across the world applying to a given university with. So academics is something that is required. So what you can distinguish yourself with would be your extracurricular activities. If you have a rounded personality, it's something that they do value a lot. So as long as you do have maybe, and it can be any extracurricular for that matter, doesn't need to be an award-winning sport or something like that. If you have anything to show for yourself, please do highlight it in your personal statement and maybe put a line or two about it in your SOP. It will help you a lot in. It will make the university identify you separately apart from academics. So that is something that every student will apply with. So extracurricular activities are something that you can use to show yourself unique. As a question before I mentioned. Okay. So how long does preparation take usually? Is it necessary to enroll in a center for coaching? So I, being a person who hasn't enrolled for any coaching of any kind, I would advocate the same as well. I didn't find a particular need of coaching for exams. So these exams are generally based on math aptitude or English, which can be picked up through the ways I mentioned. So going through writing sample tests, trying to do like using flashcards, remember your verbal using questions, trying to go through your trying to do different types of questions in GRE or TOEFL, trying to do different speaking skill questions. That should be more. It's not a critical test, as in it's not your JEE test where you need to prepare a lot for getting a certain amount of marks. I feel that you can do it if you have enough time and you're ready to put the effort. You can do it without coaching. But people who do prefer coaching, I would say I wouldn't say no to that. So if you are interested, if you feel that you are lacking in some place and you do need coaching, please do go. So that is nothing to be that is nothing, that's not an issue. You can take up coaching as well. But all I would like to say is it is possible to do it without coaching as well. Just a reminder. Yeah. So are there any other questions that you would like me to clarify? So I think I reached the end of the Q&A. So is there anyone else who would like to ask questions?
All right. I think since we have no more questions, I would like to really thank you, Ashish. It was a really enlightening and insightful talk. on the path of how to go abroad for higher studies and what we can do. It was really insightful. We would also like to thank Dr. Chitra Babu ma'am, Dr. K. Madeshwari ma'am, Dr. Sujaudeen sir, and Dr. Sharat Chandran sir for giving us this wonderful opportunity to organize this event. And we really hope this helped the students and gave them a better understanding of the progress. And thank you again very much. It was a pleasure having you. We wish you all the very best for your future endeavors. And we really hope you can join us again in the future as well.
Definitely, Ghanshyam. Thank you for the kind words. And I'd like to thank my professors as well, Dr. Madeshwari ma'am, Dr. Chitra Babu ma'am, and everyone who had invited me back to make this talk possible. So I'd like to give my thanks to them as well. And I'd be glad to join you guys back anytime in the future as well. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashish. And thank you to all the participants as well. It was great having you all. Thank you, everyone.